This story is about the realization of the American dream in New York Spanish Harlem, El Barrio. It's about the kind of success that parents often wish for their children. It's about a common man who succeeded beyond expectations and dedicated his life to helping families and their children to succeed. Such is the story about New York State Assemblyman Angelo Del Toro of the 68th Assembly District in Manhattan, New York. Fate would have it that one day, the son of a poor and struggling first-generation Puerto Rican family would become one of the most influential and effectual policymakers in New York State Legislative Chamber. During the early 1900s, Spanish Harlem, located in Manhattan's Upper East Side, became the new frontier for our fellow Americans from Puerto Rico, who, like earlier pioneers, came from afar, seeking jobs and better opportunities for their families.
When my mother arrived from San Juan on a boat, they didn't have the flights, the airplane flights. She didn't even have an overcoat, and she arrived in the middle of a snowstorm. So it must have been cultural shock just that first day to find it snow and very cold in New York City. They both had to work very hard. They worked 12 hours a day to support their family and to try to get a home going. And it was a traumatic experience for them. They came here, they were the first of their families to come here.
About 20 years before Angelo was born, his father, Sergeant Dionisio Del Toro, had been honorably discharged from the United States Army. Sergeant Del Toro had served in the highly decorated 65th Infantry Regiment of Puerto Rico. Now he found himself in New York City, penniless and unable to find a job due to the harsh depression that was ravishing and plundering the nation's economy during the 1930s. Eventually, with the help of the Lithographers Union, Senor Dionisio Del Toro earned a meager $7 a week. To make ends meet, Angelo Del Toro's mother had to work 12 hours a day in the laundry room at the Commodore Hotel on 42nd Street. Decades later, Angelo would receive the Legislator of the Year award at the same hotel.
I was very sad, but I was also very proud because it was like a very measurable way of measuring progress of a community and of a family. Here she had worked in the hotel for almost slave wages, and here I was receiving in the big dining area, the big ballroom of the hotel in front of all, must have been about 1,200 guests there at least, this beautiful award, and it really made me feel very proud, but it made me feel very sad at one point because I had to refer to her in the past tense because she had just passed away.
While little Angelo was growing up, the proud Del Toro family would stroll down the streets of El Barrio to attend weekend church services. One of 8 brothers, Angelo, who as a child was able to overcome great adversities and poor health, would someday become one of the most successful leaders from his hometown of El Barrio. Del Toro was educated in the public schools of New York City. He scored high on the entry exam and was able to attend one of the state's most prestigious high schools, Brooklyn Tech. By 1968, his drive and tenacity would earn him an undergraduate degree in political science at the City College of New York. Determined to achieve greater heights, he continued his education, and in 1972, he earned a law degree from New York Law School. Tormented by the destitution, impoverishment, and indigent conditions throughout Spanish Harlem, and influenced by his own family's struggle with poverty, Del Toro, while in his teen years, became an ardent community activist, fighting to better the plight of the poor, the powerless, and the disenfranchised. He had been inspired to enter the public arena by the motivating words and work of national leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and United States Senator Robert Kennedy.
Well, you got to start with Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. Here was a movement, he was a Baptist minister from a little church in, I don't know if you've ever been to Atlanta to see where his church was. It was just a little church, maybe had 100, 200 people. And he took on the United States. He took on all those southern states who had history, a century-long tradition of discriminating and making life for black people and for any non-white person. Very difficult. Outright discrimination, barriers being placed in people's lives. And he said that by organizing ourselves and being nonviolent, that we could change the way this country thought. He said his writings were that America was a good country. It had a few bad people, but that the goals of the country were very good, that the goals of equality and what we had to do is get America to live up to its creed of all men all men and women being created equal. So I thought that was a very positive message. And Bobby Kennedy was like a doer. I mean, the one thing about Bobby Kennedy is that when he came into poor neighborhoods, there was a compassion that he expressed. I mean, he could pick up a baby who was probably a little dirty in the face and sick and who hadn't eaten, and you could feel that he empathized with the baby and that somehow this country had to take care of that child and provide opportunities for that child, that the country couldn't exist with so many people being so poor, whether it be down in Kentucky in the Appalachia or in East Harlem or Central Harlem or Bedford-Stuyvesant, that this country was big enough and good enough to try to make life better for all its citizens.
Angelo's public demonstrations and fervent outcry for his people to be respected by society would one day help to stimulate the concept of self-empowerment amongst the people of El Barrio. His mild-mannered yet relentless call for public policy changes in New York would one day prove fruitful. Angelo Del Toro played a key role in the formation of important new policies and services for his community, such as in 1974, Angelo's leadership, talent, and vision were recognized by Paul O'Dwyer, president of the New York City Council, who appointed him as his special assistant.
Paul was one of those who was in the forefront of every major social fight. He was in the forefront when Herman Badillo ran for district leader in East Harlem. He was Herman's lawyer. And so I learned a great deal. I learned a great deal about civil liberties, about standing up for what you believe in from Paul O'Dwyer, and I thought it was a marvelous experience. I handled his city council legislation. I had to draft resolutions for him, and I represented him at community groups and other events that he would have me go.
Assemblyman Del Toro's elective record includes the election as district leader from 1972 to 1977. In 1980, he served as a delegate to the National Democratic Convention. Since 1974, he has been re-elected by the people of Spanish Harlem to 10 two-year terms in the New York State Assembly.
Angelo's been elected 10 times to office by Spanish Harlem because he cares about the people in Spanish Harlem. Angelo's idea of being an assemblyman is not going to Albany on Monday and coming home on Wednesday or Thursday. It's providing services to the community. It's using his power, and he is very, very powerful, in Albany to provide things that people in the community need, and they know it. They know that he's just not a guy who's a face on a poster, and they know he's just not somebody whose newsletters come into their mailbox. He's a visible force for good every single day in the community, and because he's that kind of a force for good, people respond to him. I work with a lot of politicians if you ask people what they think about them, they say they only come around at election time. Angelo was around every single day of the year, and therefore when he runs for re-election, he doesn't have to reintroduce himself to people. They already know who he is and know what he's about and know how important he is to their lives.
Servant, you will notice that he is always the one with a smile. He's always the one that has a joke. He's always the one that will make you feel at ease. When someone from the district or from New York City comes up to Albany, he's usually the first one to get up on the floor, acknowledge their presence, and give them their due. I think that Angelo, as a human being, is just your typical average Latino who just wants to make everyone feel at home. In a state legislature where we are known for being aloof and for government being detached, in Angelo you have someone that has managed to bridge government and people in a real connection. I think that to the people of East Harlem, one of the real reasons why they keep always sending him back and back again is because Angelo has never lost his humanity, whether it's his sense of humor, whether it's his passion for the people who he represents. Altogether, Angelo, after 20 years, has managed to keep that element of humanity.
Like Assemblyman Oscar Garcia Rivera, his Puerto Rican predecessor in the State Assembly back in 1938, Angelo Del Toro has worked arduously to effectively represent his loyal Spanish Harlem community.
He's always voted consistently for women's issues, whether it is bills that are of importance to battered women, bills that are important for to do something about discrimination of women in jobs, in economic development, for health services for women. I'll tell you, Angelo has an outstanding record as a legislator, you know, and the sad thing is that at times people in the district are not aware of the kind of job that he does up here. That's what bothers me at times, that they are unable to realize all the wonderful things that he is doing here on behalf of his district.
Del Toro's legacy can be measured by his notable legislative accomplishments in the fields of education and social services.
That when he came up here, he came to do a job, and now at this later part of his career, he can look back and say to himself, I've done it, and I've done it well. I did it to the best of my ability, and I have a lot to be proud of. I know that I, as a legislator, as someone who came much after him, I know that he has left a legacy that is not always obvious, but a legacy that nevertheless is there, whether it was in bilingual education, whether it was in social services when he was the chairman of the Social Services Committee, in chairman of the Education Committee. Angelo's legacy will be recognized much longer after we have stopped serving in the legislature.
Let us listen to Assemblyman Angelo Del Toro debating Assemblyman Vivich on New York 1 television's Inside City Hall, moderated by Roma Torre.
Aid to education. It's we hear every year it's so outmoded, so antiquated, and this year I think it breaks down to what? New York City school children compose something like 37%
on enrollment.
Right, and we're only getting 34% of the state aid, which seems very unfair.
It is unfair.
So are we making any
But getting
headway
back to
there?
the question before, this is a classic example that you asked me earlier. If we got to the 37%, which would be a 2.5% increase, is Mayor Giuliani willing to commit that amount? He's using the children to get that amount. He's saying, yes, there's a disparity here. We should base it on enrollment, which would give us more money, but he's not willing to make the commitment that disparity goes into the children.
Well, I hear it differently because when Rudy was testifying at the Ways and Means hearing, he also talked about the fact that the formula is unfair and that the children in New York City have gotten the short end of the stick year in and year out. Again, I believe with what he's trying to accomplish by making the administrative, and again, let's put that in very bold words, administrative cuts, hopefully if we can get that 2% increase, then he can come in front of us and say, you know, now that we have cut costs down, now that we are streamlining services right into the classroom, you've given me that extra 2%, it's going right into the classroom. He can't do it right now.
You can't use the children to get extra 2% and then not give it to them.
Yeah,
That's
what do
my
you say
bottom
to
line.
Del Toro has successfully sponsored over 100 public laws bearing his name. As a consummate legislative leader, all New Yorkers and undocumented aliens have felt Del Toro's sense of strength, compassion, and integrity.
In the state constitution, Article 18 of the state constitution says that it's the requirement of the state to provide for minimal needs of its population. That's in the state constitution. But I think the real answer to that lies in our Judeo-Christian heritage. We go back to the Old Testament, and the prophet Isaiah says to us that the person who worships God in the best way is not the one who goes to church every day and says a prayer, but that does God's deeds. And what are God's deeds? Taking care of the sick, to take care of the uneducated, to take care of those that can't take care of themselves, to visit prisoners in prison, to try to make life better for them. And by helping those who are least able to help it themselves, you are doing God's work. And I think that should be the basis. If we follow that moral code, that we're all responsible. Yes, we are each other's keeper. And if we can provide a society when we do that, well, I think that's great. And it will be better for all of us. It's in the state's interest. Here. The United States Constitution in the 14th Amendment says, no state shall discriminate or deny the equal protection of the laws or the due process of laws against any person within their jurisdiction. It doesn't say within to any citizen, it says any person. So that means that if a program is available to citizens of New York State, it's got to be made available to everybody. So if you educate children, you can't discriminate and not educate people who come here from other countries. So I wish it was in place, because those same immigrants, whether it be, I hate the word illegal immigrants, I prefer undocumented aliens, documented and undocumented, are also providing. I mean, it's not just that they're taking, I mean, they're creating wealth, they're working, the majority of them work, they go out and create wealth. And again, this is what New York's role, I mean, see, I think this question is being asked now in our society because the color of the immigrant has changed. When the immigrants were coming from Europe and Northern Europe, when they, it was all right. We could provide opportunity for them. But as they come more and more from Africa, from South America, from the Asia, and the non-white immigrants, we seem to be asking this question. I mean, I think if it was good policy 100 years ago, it's even better policy now.
Well, Angelo has been one of the most effective members I know. Angelo knows which buttons have to be pushed to get something accomplished. He has done yeoman's work in budget negotiations. He has been able to achieve for his people, for his community, tremendous input into the budget of the state of New York each year. He does this by, again, being a legislator, a complete legislator, taking on his responsibilities now as chairman of the Education Committee on a statewide basis. I mean, he serves all of the people, and he commands the respect from all of the people. You just have to walk through a state agency, any state agency, they know who Angelo Del Toro is.
Well, I think across the state of New York, he's known certainly for his leadership over the last few years as chair of the Education Committee, and particularly the way in which he has insisted that education funds be brought into the community for programs that are going to meet a particular need. It wasn't just let's spend more money for education, but Angelo said let's target the money for things like drug education. I think what he did in terms of turning around the whole way in which money for drug education programs in the city of New York, this has made a great difference. When I was president of the Board of Education, everybody came down and talked about the Del Toro program. I mean, his name was on it because it signified that Angelo was committed to making sure that the state money came into his district and the districts across the city to meet a particular perceived need, not just, throwing money at a problem.
Life was never easy for Angelo. Besides enduring harsh economic conditions, at the tender age of 3 years old, he suffered and agonized with polio, a most crippling disease. Today, at age 47, he continues to work as hard as ever, despite having experienced a kidney transplant back in 1990.
And Angelo just looks at his illness as part of life and just keeps going. The legislature is his life. His people is his life. And Angelo just keeps going, and it's an inconvenience, the fact that he has to take care of some medical needs. That just takes a few hours out of his life each time and just goes ahead, you never know it.
In order to help empower the Hispanic community throughout the state, Assemblyman Del Toro promoted the concept and inspired the creation of the New York State Assembly Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force.
One of the ideas that Angelo had was the creation of a task force, somewhat different from any type of caucus. He felt that if we were able to put a task force that dealt with the Latino issues in New York State, from Buffalo to Long Island, and a task force that would be representative of not only the Puerto Ricans in the assembly, but also the whites, blacks that represented 15% or more Latino population. So that was Angelo's idea.
With the help of Governor Mario Cuomo and other leaders like Congressman Charles Rangel and State Senator Olga Mendez, Assemblyman Angelo Del Toro secured hundreds of millions of dollars to rebuild East Harlem's hospitals.
Angelo has been consistent in fighting for the rights of everybody, but specifically he feels very strongly about the rights and his concerns for the senior citizens. You know, I always tell him that God will be good to him because he was a good son.
He loved his mother more than anyone else in the world, and he always followed her advice to stay in school and to help his family and his neighbors.
My mother was a main force in our lives. My father had passed away when we were 7 years old, and Mom, kept the family going, and she instilled in us that we should get educated, that education was a way out for us to do constructive things. And she was a very moral person, and she kept that drive going. And it was reinforced by all my brothers. And so I had a tremendous family structure that kept reinforcing it, that we had to keep trying and do better.
Some children succeed beyond their parents' expectations. Who would have dreamt that one day Angelo would rise beyond the clenching jaws of the ghettos and do well? Today, Angelo Del Toro is recognized and respected by leaders in every New York community.
But I would hope that someone, the kids that he's appropriated education funds for, would at least attempt to do some of the things that he's done. And if they did that, then I know that this world would be a better place.
Look around. Do you see another leader in the crowd? Do you see another young person who is willing to rise to the occasion and who is ready to lead his or her people out of the slums of America? Perhaps you are that person.